Something sinister is hunting Rihanna, not just one deranged individual, not just bad luck. We're talking about a systematic campaign of terror that's been unfolding in the shadows for years while the world remained oblivious. Jason Lee just shattered the silence with revelations so disturbing they've sent shockwaves rippling through the entire entertainment industry. This man doesn't play games. He moves within inner circles most of us will never access. He's witnessed things firsthand. He holds receipts. And right now, he's pulling back the curtain on a nightmare scenario that transforms everything we thought we understood about celebrity vulnerability. What he's exposing isn't just another tabloid headline. It's a chilling chronicle of repeated violations, calculated intrusions, and a terrifying pattern that screams coordination rather than coincidence. Buckle up, because once you hear what's really been happening behind those mansion gates, you'll never look at fame the same way again. For weeks, the narrative seemed straightforward enough. The media machinery churned out a simple story that audiences could easily digest. A mentally unstable woman named Rihanna developed an unhealthy fixation on Rihanna. She posted increasingly unhinged content across social media platforms, spewing vitriol and disturbing threats. Then somehow, through methods authorities haven't fully explained, she managed to pinpoint Rihanna's exact location in Los Angeles. 10 gunshots shattered the tranquility of an exclusive neighborhood. Police descended. Rihanna was apprehended. Justice would be served. Roll credits. That's the sanitized version. Everyone accepted without question. But Jason Lee, who maintains intimate friendships within Rihanna's inner circle and has zero motivation to fabricate stories that could destroy his credibility, just detonated that comfortable narrative into 1,000 fragments. During a recent podcast episode, he didn't just add details. He fundamentally restructured our understanding of what's actually transpiring. This wasn't an isolated event. This wasn't random. This wasn't the unfortunate consequence of fame attracting unstable individuals. This was the latest manifestation of something far more calculated, far more insidious, and far more dangerous than anyone outside Rihanna's immediate sphere realized. The question that's now burning through online communities and causing genuine concern among industry insiders is stark and deeply unsettling. What if Rihanna has been marked as a target by forces that operate beyond the comprehension of ordinary stalker psychology? What if the people orchestrating these violations aren't who law enforcement is currently focusing on? What if we've all been staring at the puppet while ignoring the hands manipulating the strings? The entire framework is collapsing, and what's emerging underneath is absolutely bone-chilling. Jason Lee's emotional state during this disclosure speaks volumes about the gravity of the situation. This isn't gossip. This is an entertainment industry drama dressed up for clicks. The fury radiating from his words cuts through any performative aspects of podcast culture. He's advocating for the death penalty regarding Rihanna. He explicitly stated that if given the power to vote for her execution, he wouldn't hesitate for a microsecond. That level of visceral rage doesn't emerge from abstract sympathy. It emerges from proximity to real trauma, from watching someone you genuinely care about endure psychological torture that the public never witnessed. Jason is channeling Rihanna's own devastation, her fury, her sense of violation that words can't adequately capture. But he's also issuing a warning that everyone needs to comprehend. Then he dropped the information that transforms this entire situation from disturbing to absolutely nightmarish. This isn't the first intrusion Rihanna has endured. Not even close. There's a documented incident that predates Rihanna's attack, an incident that never generated headlines, never sparked investigation, and was quietly swept under the rug while the threat it represented continued festering beneath the surface. Rihanna owns multiple properties, and like many celebrities seeking additional revenue streams, or simply managing their real estate portfolios, she rents certain properties to trusted individuals. One of those properties became the stage for a terrifying encounter that should have triggered massive security overhauls and law enforcement attention, but somehow slipped through the cracks of public awareness. Cardi B was renting that residence. This was during her pregnancy with Culture, a vulnerable time when she should have been cocooned in safety and peace. Instead, she experienced something that would haunt most people for the remainder of their lives. Picture the scenario unfolding. It's deep into night hours when darkness transforms familiar spaces into something ominous. Cardi B is in that liminal state between sleep and wakefulness, her body exhausted from carrying new life, her mind finally surrendering to rest after another demanding day navigating fame and pregnancy simultaneously. Then her eyes open to an image ripped straight from nightmares. A man, a complete stranger, standing inside the house, not outside attempting entry, not making noise that would alert security. Inside, already past every barrier that should have protected her, just standing there in the darkness, a shadow given human form. The terror that must have detonated through her nervous system in that instant is unimaginable. Pregnant women are already operating in a heightened state of protective instinct. Every evolutionary alarm system in the human body activates when you're carrying a child. And now there's an intruder, an unknown male presence, already inside the supposedly secure space where you're at your most vulnerable. Jason revealed that Cardi, being from the Bronx and possessing the street wisdom that comes from growing up in environments where self-protection isn't optional, had a firearm accessible. That weapon might have been the only reason this incident didn't escalate into a tragedy that would have dominated news cycles for months. She confronted this intruder with a gun drawn, demanding answers, her voice probably shaking despite her attempts at projection strength and control. The man's response is what transforms this from a standard breaking and entering scenario into something far more calculated and disturbing. He looked at her, registered that she wasn't who he expected, and with chilling calmness, he stated his purpose with brutal simplicity. He was looking for Rihanna, not Cardi B, not whoever might be in the house. Specifically Rihanna. He had intelligence suggesting Rihanna would be in that location, and he had infiltrated the property based on that intelligence. When he realized his information was outdated or incorrect, when he understood that his target wasn't present, he simply withdrew. No panic, no violence, no desperate scrambling, just a methodical retreat, like someone checking an address and finding the recipient had moved. Then he vanished into the night, leaving Cardi B trembling with adrenaline and confusion, probably second-guessing her own perception of what just transpired. According to Jason, Cardi eventually managed to calm down enough to return to sleep, process the trauma as best she could, and later informed Rihanna about the incident. And here's where it gets even more unsettling. Rihanna's reported response was to brush it off, to minimize it, to treat it as just another unfortunate byproduct of fame, rather than the serious security breach and targeted threat that it clearly represented. But here's what we need to understand about that response. It doesn't indicate that Rihanna didn't care or didn't take it seriously. It indicates something far more tragic. It suggests that violations like this have become so normalized in her existence that her threat assessment mechanism has been fundamentally recalibrated. When danger becomes constant background noise, when your baseline reality includes a possibility of intrusion and violence, your psychological defense mechanisms adapt by downplaying each individual incident to preserve your sanity. That's not dismissiveness. That's trauma adaptation. That's what happens when you've been under siege for so long that catastrophe stops feeling catastrophic and starts feeling routine. Now, I conducted extensive research trying to verify the timeline and details of this rental arrangement. Property records indicate that Rihanna began actively renting certain holdings around early 2021, commanding approximately $80,000 monthly for premium estates. That's when the documented rental history becomes publicly accessible through various real estate tracking services and luxury property databases. But here's the complication that actually validates Jason's account rather than contradicting it. There's no public paper trail connecting Cardi B to that specific property. No lease agreements filed under her legal name. No transaction records that researchers or journalists could easily locate. And that absence of evidence is actually evidence itself, because celebrities operating at that stratosphere don't rent properties under their own names. They utilize shell corporations, management companies, legal entities specifically designed to create layers of separation between their public identities and their private transactions. It's standard practice for anyone with sufficient resources who wants to maintain even a semblance of privacy in an era where information has become frighteningly accessible. So the fact that we can't find Cardi B's name attached to that rental doesn't mean it didn't happen. It means the appropriate security protocols were followed to keep that information confidential, which makes the intrusion even more disturbing, because it means someone breached not just physical security, but informational security as well. This man knew, somehow, despite all protective measures, despite the aliases and shell companies and non-disclosure agreements, he knew that property was connected to Rihanna. He knew enough to target it specifically. He had intelligence that should have been impossible to obtain. That level of information access doesn't happen by accident. That's not some obsessed fan scouring social media for clues and getting lucky. That's someone with connections, with sources, with the kind of access that implies either insider knowledge or sophisticated surveillance capabilities. Jason confirmed there was security stationed at the gate. Professional personnel whose entire job description is preventing exactly this type of intrusion. So how did this man bypass them? How did he penetrate the perimeter, access the interior, and navigate to where he believed Rihanna will be located without triggering any alarms or encounters with security staff? And here's the detail that makes my skin crawl every time I contemplate it. His demeanor when confronted by Cardi B. There was no panic, no aggression, no desperate fight or flight response that would characterize someone who just got caught committing a felony. He was calm, almost professional. He stated his purpose matter-of-factly, assessed that his target wasn't present, and executed a clean withdrawal. That's not amateur stalker behavior. That's not unhinged obsession. That's operational discipline. That's someone executing a mission who understands how to abort when parameters change. That's someone who was sent rather than someone who acted on deranged impulse. To comprehend why Rihanna might be facing coordinated threats, we need to examine the machinery that built her into a global phenomenon and what happens when artists attempt to extract themselves from that machinery's mechanisms. Rihanna isn't simply another entertainer. She's been engineered into a multi-billion-dollar asset, a revenue-generating engine whose output has enriched countless executives, shareholders, and industry power brokers over the course of her career. During her peak music production years, she wasn't just releasing albums. She was manufacturing cultural moments. Every single was a guaranteed chart topper. Every album cycle generated hundreds of millions in revenue across multiple channels, including sales, streaming, touring, merchandising, and licensing. She was reliable. She was profitable. She was controlled. Then something shifted in her trajectory. Rihanna made a decision that probably felt personally empowering, but professionally defiant from the perspective of the entities who'd invested in her as a product. She stopped producing music, not temporarily, not for a brief hiatus. She essentially walked away from the recording industry to focus on building Fenty Beauty, expanding into fashion, creating a business empire where she maintained actual ownership and creative control rather than functioning as a talented employee enriching others. And she succeeded spectacularly. Fenty Beauty revolutionized the cosmetics industry with inclusive shade ranges and direct-to-consumer marketing strategies that traditional brands couldn't replicate. She achieved billionaire status not through music but through entrepreneurship. She proved she didn't need the record labels. She didn't need the traditional power structures. She could build wealth and influence independently. For someone like Rihanna, that probably feels like liberation, like finally escaping the golden cage of celebrity where you're simultaneously worshipped and controlled. But here's what most people don't understand about the entertainment industry. It doesn't operate like a normal business sector with conventional ethics and straightforward transactions. It operates like organized crime, like a sophisticated mafia where territories are controlled, assets are owned, and defiance carries consequences that extend beyond financial penalties. We've watched this pattern repeat throughout music industry history. Executives like Clive Davis, who wielded godlike power over artists' careers. Figures like Diddy, whose business practices blur the line between entrepreneurship and exploitation. The countless stories of artists who tried to renegotiate contracts, who fought for master recording ownership, who attempted to break free from predatory agreements, only to face mysterious obstacles, career sabotage, or worse. When you sign those initial contracts as a young artist desperate for your break into the industry, you're often signing away more than you comprehend. You're becoming property. Your image, your music, your future output. Sometimes even your identity becomes owned by corporate entities that view you as inventory rather than a human being with autonomy and rights. And the most valuable inventory doesn't get to just walk away when they decide they're done. There are expectations. There are obligations. There are people who build empires on a foundation of your talent and who will not simply accept your departure gracefully. Rihanna hasn't released a studio album since 2016's Anti. That's approaching a full decade of silence from someone who was previously one of the most prolific hitmakers in contemporary music. And yes, she's been occupied with business ventures and motherhood and building a life with A$AP Rocky. Those are legitimate priorities that any reasonable person would respect. But the music industry isn't populated by reasonable people operating with conventional ethics. It's populated by predators who see artists as resources to be exploited until they're no longer profitable, at which point they're discarded without concern for their well-being. When an asset as valuable as Rihanna goes silent for that extended period, when she redirects her energy and influence away from the channels that enrich the people who believe they own her success, tensions develop, resentments build, and in an industry where violence and intimidation have always been tools of control, where artists have mysteriously died or been silenced throughout history, those tensions can manifest in terrifying ways. Now, here's where it gets really interesting from a conspiracy standpoint. And I want to emphasize that I'm speculating based on patterns rather than claiming definitive knowledge. LVMH, the French luxury conglomerate that's one of the wealthiest and most powerful corporations on the planet, owned a 50% stake in Fenty Beauty. This partnership made sense for both parties initially. Rihanna got access to LVMH distribution networks, manufacturing capabilities, and retail presence. LVMH got association with one of the world's most influential celebrities and a brand that was genuinely disrupting the beauty industry. But recent reports indicate that LVMH is exploring selling their stake in Fendi. And that's bizarre, because Fendi isn't struggling. It's not declining. It remains enormously profitable and culturally relevant. So why would LVMH want to divest from a successful venture? Unless there's pressure being applied behind closed doors. Unless there are conversations happening in boardrooms and private meetings that we'll never hear about. Unless Rihanna's attempt to maintain independence and control is creating conflicts with people who have influence over LVMH decision-making. LVMH is connected to power structures that extend far beyond consumer products. The people who control that corporation have relationships with everyone from heads of state to organized crime families to intelligence agencies. When you operate at that level of wealth and influence, the lines between legitimate business and darker enterprises become increasingly blurred. I'm not saying LVMH is directly involved in threatening Rihanna, but I am saying that when you examine the web of connections, when you look at who has financial interest in controlling her movements and decisions, when you consider that someone appears to have access to information about her whereabouts that should be closely guarded, it's worth questioning whether there are forces beyond deranged fans orchestrating these violations. Jason Lee stating that there's a target on Rihanna's back isn't hyperbole. It's a warning from someone who understands the dynamics at play. It's confirmation that these incidents aren't random. They're part of a pattern that's been unfolding for years, while Rihanna and her team have been fighting to maintain some semblance of safety and normalcy. Defiance in the entertainment industry doesn't go unanswered. Artists who fight for control, who refuse to produce on demand, who build independent wealth and influence outside the traditional power structures, often face consequences that range from career sabotage to physical danger. And when you're as valuable as Rihanna, when you represent billions in potential revenue that's currently not flowing where certain people believe it should flow, those consequences can be absolutely ruthless. Let's pause for a moment and really sit with the human tragedy embedded in the situation, because it's easy to get lost in conspiracy theories and industry analysis while losing sight of the actual people whose lives are being devastated by these violations. Cardi B was pregnant. She was carrying her first child, experiencing all the vulnerability and anticipation and hope that comes with impending motherhood. She should have been focused on preparing for culture's arrival, on maintaining her health, on enjoying those final weeks before her life transformed forever. Instead, she experienced trauma that could have resulted in miscarriage from the sheer stress of the encounter. Pregnant women's bodies are already operating at maximum capacity, hormone levels fluctuating wildly, nervous systems on high alert. The introduction of genuine mortal danger into that equation isn't just frightening, it's potentially life-threatening for both mother and child. Imagine the scene with complete clarity. It's the deepest part of night, when the world feels most isolated and threatening. You're in that foggy state between sleep and consciousness, your body heavy with exhaustion, and the physical demands of growing another human being. Then your eyes open to see a figure standing in the darkness. A man, a stranger, already inside your sanctuary. The adrenaline that explodes through your system in that instant could trigger premature labor. The panic could spike your blood pressure to dangerous levels. The fear could create trauma responses that persist long after the immediate danger has passed, affecting your mental health throughout the remainder of your pregnancy and potentially your bonding with your child after birth. Cardi B is a strong person. She survived growing up in one of New York's toughest neighborhoods. She's navigated an entertainment industry notorious for chewing up and spitting out female artists. She's dealt with public scrutiny and criticism that would break most people. But strength doesn't make you immune to trauma. It just means you learn to carry it differently. The fact that she had a firearm accessible probably saved her life. And that's a tragic statement about the reality of celebrity existence that we need to acknowledge. Someone at her level of fame and wealth, staying in a supposedly secure property in an exclusive Los Angeles neighborhood with professional security personnel on site, still needed to keep a weapon within reach because the protective measures in place were insufficient. She confronted this intruder at gunpoint, probably with her hands shaking despite her best efforts at appearing in control, probably with her voice threatening to crack despite her attempts at projection strength. And she got answers that must have made the situation even more confusing and terrifying. He wasn't there for her. He didn't care about Cardi B despite her massive fame and public profile. She was irrelevant to his purpose. He was hunting Rihanna. He'd received intelligence suggesting Rihanna would be in that location, and he'd infiltrated the property based on that intelligence. The man's calmness when he realized his mistake is what transforms this from a terrifying home invasion into something that suggests professional operation rather than deranged stalking. He didn't panic at being discovered. He didn't become violent or desperate. He simply acknowledged the situation had changed, stated his actual target, and withdrew the kind of discipline that suggests training or experience with high-risk scenarios. Then he disappeared, leaving Cardi to process what just happened, to question whether it was real or some pregnancy-induced nightmare, to wonder if she should call police or security or just try to calm down and protect her unborn child from the stress hormones flooding her system. According to Jason's account, Cardi eventually managed to return to sleep, which speaks to either remarkable resilience or profound exhaustion or possibly shock that prevented her from fully processing the danger she just faced. She later told Rihanna about the incident, probably expecting alarm and immediate action and comprehensive security overhauls. Instead, Rihanna reportedly brushed it off, and that response, which might seem callous or irresponsible on the surface, actually reveals something heartbreaking about her psychological state. When you've been living under threat for an extended period, when violations and danger have become part of your normal existence rather than exceptional events, your calibration for what constitutes a crisis gets fundamentally warped. Rihanna downplaying a home intrusion where someone was specifically hunting her doesn't indicate she didn't take it seriously. It indicates that incidents of that severity have become so routine in her life that they no longer trigger the alarm response they should. That's trauma adaptation. That's what happens when your nervous system gets overloaded by repeated threats and starts down-regulating its responses to preserve your ability to function. She's probably dealt with so many stalkers, so many threats, so many security breaches over the years that each individual incident stops feeling acute and starts feeling like background noise. And that normalization of danger is its own form of psychological damage that will likely affect her for the rest of her life. But here's what really hits me about this situation: the ripple effects of fear that extend beyond the primary target. Cardi B was involved in whatever dynamics have made Rihanna a target. She was just someone who happened to be renting a property at the wrong time. She got pulled into someone else's nightmare through no fault of her own, and she'll carry that trauma forever. Her daughter Culture, who was in the womb during that violation, was exposed to the massive stress hormone dump that accompanied Cardi's terror. Research on prenatal stress suggests that intense maternal fear during pregnancy can affect fetal development, potentially influencing the child's stress response systems and anxiety levels throughout their life. That means this violation orchestrated against Rihanna might have impacted Culture's neurobiology before she was even born. That's the kind of cascading consequence that never makes headlines but represents the real human cost of these campaigns of intimidation. And Rihanna herself is now a mother of 2 sons. She's trying to build a family with A$AP Rocky. She should be experiencing the joy and fulfillment of motherhood without the constant shadow of fear darkening every moment. She should be able to take her children to parks, to post photos without scrutinizing every background detail for location clues, to exist in the world without calculating threat levels. Instead, she's raising children while knowing that people have repeatedly violated her security, that someone out there has demonstrated both the capability and the intent to reach her, that the protective measures she's invested in have failed multiple times. That's not the environment any parent wants for their children. That's not the life anyone deserves regardless of their fame or wealth. When we talk about celebrity stalking and security breaches, we need to remember that these aren't just abstract scenarios or entertaining drama to discuss online. These are real people experiencing genuine terror, carrying trauma that will affect them psychologically for years or decades, trying to maintain some semblance of normalcy while knowing that danger could manifest at any moment. Rihanna is living in a state of hypervigilance that's exhausting on a neurological level. Every unexpected sound probably triggers a startle response. Every unfamiliar face probably gets assessed as a potential threat. Every public appearance probably requires extensive security planning and risk assessment. That's not living. That's surviving. And nobody should have to exist that way regardless of how famous or wealthy or successful they become. Now let's examine Ivana's case, because the speed at which the legal system is processing the situation raises more questions than answers. And the inconsistencies in her behavior suggest there might be dimensions to this story that aren't being publicly acknowledged. Ivana was arrested following the shooting at Rihanna's property. She's been charged with an extensive list of felonies, including attempted murder, burglary, firearms violations, and various other counts that collectively carry the potential for decades of imprisonment. This is serious. This is not a situation where someone gets probation and community service. She's facing the very real possibility of spending the rest of her life in prison. Given those stakes, her legal strategy should be straightforward. Accept a plea deal if one's offered, because plea deals almost always involve reduced sentencing compared to what you'd face if convicted at trial. Cooperate with prosecutors. Show remorse. Do everything possible to minimize the consequences of your actions. But that's not what happened. According to reports, Ivana initially applied for a plea agreement, which makes sense from a self-preservation standpoint. Then, inexplicably, she withdrew that application and appears to be proceeding toward trial. Why would someone facing that much prison time turn down a plea deal? What possible motivation would justify taking that risk? There are a few possibilities, and none of them are reassuring. Maybe she's been assured by someone that she'll receive a lighter sentence than prosecutors are threatening. Maybe there are behind-the-scenes negotiations happening that the public isn't privy to. Maybe she's been advised that going to trial will result in certain evidence not being introduced or certain questions not being asked. Or maybe she's being pressured by someone to not accept a plea deal, because plea deals typically involve extensive debriefing sessions where defendants are questioned about every aspect of their crimes, including whether they had accomplices or assistants or connections to other criminal enterprises. If Ivana acted alone, if she's genuinely just an unhinged individual who developed an obsessive fixation and managed to locate Rihanna through her own investigative efforts, then there's no logical reason to refuse a plea agreement that would reduce her sentencing. But if she didn't act alone, if she was part of a coordinated effort or was enabled by people who provided her with information and resources, then a plea deal becomes dangerous for those other parties. Because prosecutors would absolutely demand full disclosure about anyone else involved, and if Ivana revealed the existence of accomplices or handlers, those people would face their own criminal charges. So maybe she's withdrawing from the plea because someone has made it clear that revealing certain information will be very bad for her health, even in protective custody. Or maybe she's been promised that if she takes the fall alone, her family will be taken care of financially, or she'll receive support once she's released. These are the kinds of calculations that happen in organized crime situations constantly. Someone takes a conviction to protect the broader operation, and in exchange, they're compensated in ways that make the sacrifice worthwhile. The speed at which this case is moving through the system also feels orchestrated. Typically, cases of this severity take months or even years to reach trial. There are motions to file, discovery to exchange, expert witnesses to depose, forensic evidence to analyze. The legal process is deliberately slow to ensure thorough examination of all facts and constitutional protections for defendants. But this case is accelerating toward resolution with unusual velocity, almost like there's pressure to wrap up quickly and make the headlines disappear before people start asking too many uncomfortable questions. And the questions are abundant once you start looking beyond the surface narrative. Ivana left a substantial digital footprint with her videos ranting about Rihanna, demonstrating clear animosity and disturbed thinking. That evidence establishes motive, but it doesn't explain capability. How did she determine Rihanna's location? Celebrity movements are closely guarded information. When someone at Rihanna's level travels, there are typically entire security teams coordinating logistics, using decoy vehicles, booking under aliases, deliberately obscuring their actual whereabouts. Paparazzi with decades of experience and extensive networks of sources still struggle to track celebrity movements in real time. So how did Ivana, a random individual without apparent resources or connections, managed to pinpoint exactly where Rihanna was staying in Los Angeles at that specific time? She knew the property. She knew when to arrive. She fired 10 shots, including rounds directed at an Airstream trail on the grounds, which suggests she had detailed knowledge of the layout and was targeting specific locations where she believed Rihanna might be. That level of intelligence doesn't come from scrolling through Instagram posts and making educated guesses. That comes from either sophisticated surveillance capabilities or insider information provided by someone with access to Rihanna's schedule and location data. And when you add Jason Lee's revelation about the previous intrusion, where a man breached Cardi B's rental specifically looking for Rihanna, you start to see a pattern that suggests coordination rather than isolated incidents. Maybe Ivana and that unidentified man are directly connected. Maybe they know each other. Maybe they were both part of some disturbed online community that became fixated on Rihanna. Or maybe they're both connected to something else entirely, some network or organization that's been monitoring Rihanna, gathering intelligence on her movements, and periodically testing her security or sending messages through these violent intrusions. I recognize that sounds conspiratorial. I understand that often the simplest explanation is the correct one, and maybe Ivana really is just a disturbed individual who got extremely lucky in figuring out Rihanna's location. But consider how easy it would be to establish a cover story that deflects from organized involvement. You find someone who's already unstable, someone who's already expressing violent ideation online. You provide them with information while making it seem like they discovered it themselves. You give them the tools or access they need while maintaining plausible deniability about your own involvement. Then when they get caught, all the evidence points to a lone wolf scenario. The disturbed videos provide clear motive, The person's mental health history explains their actions. Prosecutors get a conviction. The public gets closure. The actual organizers remain unexposed. This is textbook organized crime methodology. You insulate the people at the top by creating layers of separation between them and the actual violent acts. You recruit unstable individuals to be your weapons, people who can't credibly point to larger conspiracies even if they wanted it because they genuinely don't understand they've been manipulated. Ivana's social media presence, which seems to establish her as an obsessed individual acting on delusional fixations, could be genuine mental illness, or it could be a deliberately cultivated persona designed to provide exactly that explanation when law enforcement investigated. And her sudden withdrawal from a plea agreement, despite facing decades of imprisonment, suggests someone might have communicated with her about the benefits of remaining silent versus the consequences of revealing additional information. I don't have definitive proof of any of this. I'm speculating based on patterns and inconsistencies that don't quite align with the official narrative. But those speculations are worth voicing, because if there's a broader conspiracy targeting Rihanna, if these violations are coordinated rather than random, then the threat isn't neutralized just because Ivana is in custody. Let's return to examining that first intrusion, the incident involving Cardi B. Because the more you analyze the logistics of what happened, the more disturbing the security implications become. And the clearer it becomes that there are systemic vulnerabilities being exploited rather than just occasional unlucky breaches. Jason described a man who broke into property where Cardi was staying, got inside the house itself, and specifically stated he was looking for Rihanna before withdrawing when he realized she wasn't present. But let's break down everything that had to fail for that scenario to occur, because it's not one security lapse. It's a cascading series of failures that suggest either catastrophic incompetence or something more sinister. First, the man had to know that property was connected to Rihanna. Property ownership for celebrities is typically obscure through trust structures and corporate entities. Rental agreements are handled confidentially, so he had to obtain information that should have been closely guarded just to identify that location as worth targeting. Second, he had to bypass perimeter security. Jason mentioned security at the gate, which means there were presumably personnel whose job was preventing unauthorized access. So either they failed to notice an intruder, or they were somehow incapacitated, or they were complicit. Third, he had to access the interior of the house. That means either doors were unsecured, or he had tools and knowledge to defeat locks, or he had keys or access codes that should have been restricted. Fourth, he navigated to where he expected to find his target, which suggests he had some understanding of the property's layout and where someone would likely be sleeping. That's not random chance. That's not some guy hopping a fence on impulse and getting lucky. That's reconnaissance. That's planning. That's someone who had detailed intelligence about the property and how to exploit its vulnerabilities. And here's what makes this even more concerning. What was his intention if Rihanna had actually been there? He came armed with knowledge of her location and access to her residence in the middle of the night when she would be most vulnerable. What was the end game? Was he planning to threaten her, physically harm her, kidnap her for ransom, murder her? We don't know because he aborted the operation when he realized the target wasn't present. But the level of preparation and risk he accepted to get that far suggests his intentions were serious and dangerous. And thank God Cardi B was armed. Her decision to keep a firearm accessible while staying in that property might have been the only reason this didn't escalate into a violent confrontation. Because the intruder's calm demeanor suggests he was prepared for resistance. His ability to withdraw smoothly suggests he had an exit strategy planned. But the presence of an armed witness probably complicated his calculus enough that he decided discretion was preferable to confrontation. If Cardi had been defenseless, if she'd woken up to find this man and had no way to defend herself, the outcome could have been catastrophic. He might have panicked at being discovered. He might have attacked her to eliminate a witness. He might have done irreparable harm in the moment before fleeing. But instead, he simply acknowledged the situation, stated his purpose with unsettling calmness, and departed. Like he was executing a mission that didn't require improvisation or violence beyond what was necessary to accomplish the objective. That's a behavior that screams professional operation rather than obsessed fan. Stalkers act on emotion. They're erratic. They're driven by compulsions they can't control. This man displayed discipline and strategic thinking that suggests either training or extensive experience with high-risk scenarios. Now fast forward to Ivana's attack years later. Same target. Same pattern of somehow obtaining information about Rihanna's location that should have been confidential. Same ability to reach that location and act on violent intentions despite presumably improved security measures after the first incident. The fact that this has happened multiple times, that different individuals or the same network using different operators have repeatedly managed to locate and access Rihanna's whereabouts, demonstrates systematic vulnerabilities that aren't being addressed. And those vulnerabilities likely originate from information leaks rather than physical security failures alone. Because you can have the most sophisticated perimeter defenses, the most highly trained security personnel, the most advanced surveillance systems. But none of that matters if someone with access to scheduling information is selling that data to the highest bidder. In an industry built on non-disclosure agreements, where everyone from personal assistants to cleaning staff to property managers to booking agents has access to sensitive information, it only takes one person with financial motivation or personal resentment to compromise an entire security apparatus. Maybe it's someone on Rihanna's own team who needs money or has been recruited by outside interests. Maybe it's someone at the property management company handling her rentals. Maybe it's someone at travel agencies or security firms, or any of the dozens of entities that require information about her movements to coordinate logistics. All it takes is one person providing location data, arrival times, and property details to the wrong parties, and suddenly Rihanna becomes trackable despite all her protective measures. This is why celebrities live in constant paranoia. This is why they employ counterintelligence specialists to investigate their own teams. This is why they use decoys and false information and constantly rotate personnel and vendors. Because the threat isn't just external, it's internal. It's the people you have to trust with operational information who might betray that trust for money or ideology or coercion. And in Rihanna's case, given that these breaches keep happening despite presumably escalating security measures after each incident, there's likely an ongoing leak that hasn't been identified. Someone who's still providing intelligence to parties with malicious intent. Someone who's still exposing her to danger every time she moves or travels or stays in a supposedly secure location. Step back and really absorb what the situation reveals about the fundamental brokenness of celebrity security and the entertainment industry's failure to protect even its biggest stars from systematic targeting. Rihanna is one of the most famous human beings alive. She has resources that most people can't even conceptualize. She can afford the best security money can buy. She can afford to invest millions in protective measures, in personnel, in technology, in anything that might keep her safe. And yet she's still vulnerable. She's still being found. She's still being violated. People are still reaching her despite everything she's invested in protection. If someone with Rihanna's resources and fame can't achieve genuine security, what hope does anyone else have? What does that say about the systems supposedly designed to protect people from violence and harassment? It says those systems are reactive rather than proactive. It says law enforcement typically doesn't intervene until after violence has already occurred. It says that even sophisticated private security can be defeated by determined adversaries with good intelligence. It says that privacy has become a privilege that even extreme wealth can't guarantee in an era where information is commodity and everyone's movements leave digital trails and human vulnerability remains the weakest link in any security chain. And the entertainment industry, despite generating billions from their artists' labor and talent, hasn't invested in comprehensive protections that might actually prevent these incidents rather than just responding after fact. Record labels and management companies are happy to take the majority of artists' earnings. They're happy to control artists' careers and creative output. But when it comes to the duty of care they owe to human beings they profit from, they consistently fail. How many artists have been stalked, harassed, violated, or killed because the industry treated security as an afterthought rather than a priority? How many times do we have to watch celebrities live in fear or suffer trauma before there's systematic reform of how the industry approaches these issues? The industry doesn't always protect its biggest stars because sometimes the industry itself is a threat, not directly ordering violence, but creating environments where violence becomes likely through exploitation, through pushing artists to breaking points, through refusing to address known threats until they escalate into tragedies. We've witnessed this pattern repeatedly throughout entertainment history. Artists who try to renegotiate contracts suddenly face career obstacles and public relations nightmares. Artists who speak out about industry abuse find themselves blacklisted or smeared. Artists who try to leave toxic situations encounter legal barriers and financial warfare. And in some cases, artists face physical danger that's never adequately explained or investigated because asking too many questions might expose uncomfortable truths about who benefits from silencing them. I'm not directly accusing the music industry of orchestrating attacks against Rihanna, but I am pointing out that when you examine who has financial interests in controlling her behavior, who might be frustrated by her decade-long absence from music, who might want to pressure her into returning to more profitable activities, there are entities with both motive and capability. Rihanna has been building independent wealth and influence through Fendi. She's been focusing on family rather than touring and recording. She's been living on her own terms rather than according to contractual obligations and industry expectations. That independence represents a threat to people who are accustomed to controlling artists' careers and extracting maximum value from their labor. That defiance might attract consequences from people who view artists as property rather than autonomous human beings with a right to make their own choices. Jason Lee saying there's a target on Rihanna's back isn't just describing stalker obsession. It's describing systematic vulnerability, ongoing threats that suggest coordination, and resources beyond what individual obsessed fans typically possess. It's acknowledging that Rihanna has been living under siege for years, dealing with violations that never made headlines, enduring fear that the public never understood, and somehow maintaining her career and building her family despite the psychological toll of constant threat. So where does all this evidence and speculation and pattern analysis leave us as we try to comprehend what's actually happening in Rihanna's life and who's responsible for the terror she's been enduring? Ivana is in custody. She's facing charges that will likely result in imprisonment for a significant portion of her life. Justice is theoretically being served. The legal system is processing her case. The public can feel satisfied that the perpetrator has been caught and will face consequences. But is she the only perpetrator? Is she the whole story? Is her arrest the endpoint that neutralizes a threat? Based on everything Jason Lee revealed, based on the pattern of previous intrusions, based on the sophistication of intelligence gathering that enabled these attacks, based on the systematic security failures that keep occurring despite presumably escalating protective measures, I don't think this ends with Ivana. I think she's a visible face of something broader, something more organized, something that will continue operating even with her in prison, because the actual architect of these campaigns remain unexposed and unimpeded. Maybe she acted primarily on her own delusions and obsessions, but received information from sources she didn't recognize as manipulating her. Maybe she's genuinely disturbed, but was enabled and encouraged by parties with their own agendas who recognized her as a useful weapon. Maybe that man who broke into Cardi B's rental years ago was part of the same network or testing the same vulnerabilities that Ivana later exploited. Maybe they're both connected to organized elements that have been monitoring Rihanna and periodically probing her defenses. Maybe there are financial interests or industry power brokers who benefit from keeping Rihanna in a state of fear and vulnerability, who want to pressure her back into music production, who are frustrated by her decade of independence, and want to remind her that defying industry expectations carries costs. I don't have definitive proof of organized conspiracy. I'm not claiming absolute certainty about who's behind these attacks or what their ultimate objectives might be. But I am absolutely certain that the official narrative is incomplete, that there are dimensions to the situation that aren't being publicly acknowledged, and that the threat to Rihanna is far from neutralized. Jason Lee wouldn't have felt compelled to make these revelations if he thought Ivana's arrest resolved everything. He's revealing a pattern precisely because he knows it's ongoing, because he's watching someone he cares about suffer in ways that most of the public remains ignorant about, because he's hoping that exposing the history will motivate better protections or at least public understanding of the severity of what Rihanna faces. And his willingness to talk about death penalties and express visceral rage about Ivana demonstrates how deep this trauma goes for everyone in Rihanna's circle. They're not just concerned. They're terrified. They're exhausted from years of vigilance. They're angry that despite everything they've invested in security and privacy, the threats keep manifesting. The truth is we may never get complete answers about who's orchestrating these violations and what their ultimate goals might be. These kinds of situations often get buried under legal proceedings and settlements and public relations management. Victims remain silent because speaking publicly might attract more danger or reveal vulnerabilities that make them more exposed. Maybe Rihanna will never publicly discuss the full extent of what she's endured, because doing so would require acknowledging fear and trauma in ways that conflict with her public image. Maybe she'll continue projecting strength and confidence while privately dealing with the psychological wreckage of living under siege. Maybe this all gets memory hold as the news cycle moves on to the next scandal. And in a few months, nobody except Rihanna and her loved ones will still be thinking about the terror she's experienced and continues to face. But we need to remember. We need to keep questioning. We need to demand better protections for artists who are being systematically exploited and endangered by an industry that views them as disposable products. And we need to acknowledge that fame doesn't protect you. Wealth doesn't protect you. Sometimes they just make you a more valuable target, easier to locate, more rewarding to control. Rihanna is living proof that you can be beloved by millions, that you can have resources beyond most people's comprehension, that you can invest everything in security and privacy, and still find yourself hunted by forces you can't fully identify or defend against. That should terrify all of us. Because if it can happen to her, with all her advantages, then nobody is truly safe in a world where information is currency and human life is just another commodity to be exploited. This investigation is ongoing. This story continues unfolding in real time. New information will emerge. New patterns will become apparent. New questions will demand answers. And I'll be here documenting every development, analyzing every new piece of evidence, questioning every official narrative that doesn't align with the observable facts. Because this matters. Because Rihanna's safety matters. Because understanding who's behind these attacks and why they're happening matters. Because holding the entertainment industry accountable for protecting the artists they profit from matters. What's your analysis of the situation? Do you think Ivana represents the entirety of the threat Rihanna faces? Or do you see evidence of broader coordination? Do you think the music industry has financial motivations to pressure Rihanna into returning to recording? Do you think there are organized elements using disturbed individuals as weapons while maintaining plausible deniability? Drop your theories and observations in the comments section. Let's build a comprehensive understanding of what's happening through collective analysis and shared information. Let's demand transparency and accountability from the systems that have failed to protect someone as prominent and valuable as Rihanna. Hit that like button if you found this analysis valuable. Subscribe to this channel so you don't miss updates as new information emerges. Enable notifications because this story will continue developing and you will want to stay informed about every new revelation. Share this video with people who need to understand the dark realities beneath celebrity glamour, who need to recognize that fame comes with costs that most of us can't imagine, who need to question the narratives we're fed by industry spokespeople and law enforcement officials. I appreciate every single person who's invested time in understanding this complex situation. Your engagement, your critical thinking, your willingness to question official stories. That's what creates accountability and drives change. Stay vigilant out there. Stay skeptical of simple explanations for complex situations. Remember that fame and wealth don't guarantee safety. And recognize that sometimes the shadows hiding monsters are maintained by people with resources and influence that most of us will never possess. Until next time, keep questioning everything.